Okay, so yesterday we got some vocabulary for vocabulary week 5. Do y'all remember that? All right, and we read over chapters 1 and 2 of As I Lay Dying Together. Okay, so we met both the characters of Darl and Cora. All right, so we are going back to the character of Darl today, and we are going to continue kind of reading together. And then after what we do today in class together, I'm going to turn you guys over to finish reading chapters 1 through 14 to yourself, and then we are going to talk about them. So instead of us reading the entire thing out loud, we're going to talk about it. Chapter 14 is a Dewey Dell chapter, that is the daughter, all right, and it ends on page 64. So we'll see how much we can get through today. All right, so here we have a Darl chapter. And we know that Darl is one of the sons, okay? He is telling us about some of the other characters. So we have to pay attention to all of the clues and all of the hints that we are given from the individual characters so that we can figure out exactly what's going on in the story since it's told in this stream of consciousness fashion, okay? Pa and Vernon are sitting on the back porch. Pa is tilting snuff from the lid of his snuff box into his lower lip, holding the lip outdrawn between thumb and finger. They look around as I cross the porch and dip the gourd into the water bucket and drink. "Where's Jewel?" Pa says. "When I was a boy, I first learned how much better water tastes when it has set a while in a cedar bucket." Hey, Cole, will you close my door, please? "Warmish cool with a faint taste like the hot July wind and cedar trees smells. It has to set at least 6 hours and be drunk from a gourd. Water should never be drunk from metal." So he's talking about how the water kind of absorbs the flavor of the cedar bucket and tastes better. All right? "And at night it's better still. I used to lie on the pallet in the hall, waiting until I could hear them all asleep, so I could get up and go back to the bucket. It would be black, the shelf black, the still surface of the water a round orifice and nothingness, where before I stirred it awake with the dipper, I could see maybe a star or two in the bucket, and maybe in the dipper a star or two before I drank. After that, I was bigger, older. Then I would wait until they all went to sleep, so I could lie with my shirt tail up, hearing them asleep, feeling myself without touching myself, feeling the cool silence blowing on my parts, and wondering if Cash was yonder in the darkness doing it too. Had been doing it for perhaps the last 2 years before I could have wanted to or could have." All right? So he's just laying there and he's just kind of feeling the cool air on his body. So it's like he's feeling himself, but he's not. He's just laying there. "Pa's feet are badly splayed. His toes cramped and bent and warped, with no toenail at all on his little toes, from working so hard in the wet and homemade shoes when he was a boy. Beside his chair, his brogans sit." These are shoes. "They look as though they'd been hacked with a blunt axe out of pig iron. Vernon has been to town. I have never seen him go to town in overalls. His wife, they say, she taught school once too." Okay, so when he says she taught school once too, when he says this, he is talking about Vernon's wife, Cora. But who else might have taught school once? Addie. All right, so on your character sheet, under Addie, write taught school. And then under Cora, write taught school. I fling the dipper dregs to the ground and wipe my mouth on my sleeve. It is going to rain before morning, maybe before dark. Down to the barn, I say, harnessing the team. Down there fooling with that horse. He will go on through the barn into the pasture. The horse will not be in sight. He is up there among the pine seedlings in the cool. Jewel whistles once and shrill. The horse snorts. Then Jewel sees him, glinting for a gaudy instant among the blue shadows. Jewel whistles again. The horse comes dropping down the slope, stiff-legged, his ears cocking and flickering, his mismatched eyes rolling, and fetches up 20 feet away, broadside on, watching Jewel over his shoulder in an attitude kittenish and alert. "Come here, sir," Jewel says. He moves. Moving that quick, his coat bunching, tongue swirling like so many flames. With tossing mane and tail and rolling eye, the horse makes another short, curveting rush and stops again, feet bunched, watching Jewel. Jewel walks steadily toward him, his hands at his sides. Save for Jewel's legs, they are like two figures carved for a tableau savage in the sun. Okay, it's important to note right here that Darrell is narrating something that he is not witnessing. All right, so he is describing what Jewel is doing in the barn with this horse, even though he himself is not there. All right, so he is describing something that he is not witnessing. When Jewel can almost touch him, the horse stands on his hind legs and slashes down at Jewel. All right, so it's like the horse rears up and is kicking with its front feet down toward Jewel. Then Jewel is enclosed by a glittering maze of hooves, as by an illusion of wings. Okay, so what might that be a reference to? A horse with wings. Okay, so that kind of goes back to a little bit of mythology. Among them, beneath the upreared chest, he moves with the flashing limberness of a snake. For an instant, before the jerk comes onto his arms, he sees his whole body earth-free, horizontal, whipping, snake limber, until he finds the horse's nostrils and touches earth again. So what does he mean when he's talking about the jerk coming on him? Like this horse is rearing up, it's just, it's violently moving, Jewel grabs it. What's the jerk?
Isn't it that whenever the horse quickly moves and it jerks its arm?
Yeah, it's when the horse jerks him. Yeah, absolutely. Then they are rigid, motionless, terrific. The horse back thrust on stiffened, quivering legs with lowered head. Jewel with dug heels, shutting off the horse's wind with one hand, the other patting the horse's neck in short strokes, myriad and caressing, cursing the horse with obscene ferocity. Okay, so he is basically taming the horse, taming this wild horse. Now, I want to tell you, we're going to hear some profanity, or we're going to see some profanity that I just kind of skip over. This profanity is really characterizing Jewel. All right? He is angry. He is tough. He's rough. He's violent. All right? This is not necessarily a way that we ever need to speak, but it is the way he is characterized. Okay? They stand in rigid, terrific hiatus, the horse trembling and groaning. Then Jewel is on the horse's back. He flows upward in a stooping swirl like the flash of a whip, his body in midair shaped to the horse. For another moment, the horse stands spraddled, with lowered head, before it bursts into motion. They descend the hill in a series of spine-jolting jumps. Jewel high, leech-like on the withers, to the fence where the horse bunches to a scuttering halt again. "Well," Jewel says, "you can quit now if you got a plenty." Inside the barn, Jewel slides running to the ground before the horse stops. The horse enters the stall, Jewel following. Without looking back, the horse kicks at him, slamming a single hoof into the wall with a pistol-like report. Jewel kicks him in the stomach. The horse arches his neck back, cropped tooth. Jewel strikes him across the face with his fist and slides onto the trough and mounts upon it. Clinging to the hay rack, he lowers his head and peers out across the stall tops and through the doorway. The path is empty. From here, he cannot even hear Cash sawing. He reaches up and drags down hay in hurried armfuls and crams it into the rack. Okay, so he checks to make sure he doesn't see anyone coming, and then he puts hay down for this horse. Why might that be important? Okay, so people don't see him doing what? Huh? That's not what he's worried about them seeing.
Like being nice, like
Feeding him. All right? So he doesn't want anybody to see him feeding the horse. Why?
Because it's a wild horse. They don't have the money for it.
They don't have the money for it. Okay? And we're going to get back here and we're going to talk a little bit more about this later. Eat, he says. Get the blankety blank stuff out of sight while you got a chance, you puzzle gutted blank. You sweet son of a blank, he says. So yeah, he has a pretty good command of the profanity. All right, so what does Anne's ask Darrell? Where is Jewel? What is Darrell's answer, and what is the true answer that he knows but doesn't say? He says he's where? In the barn, harnessing the team. But then we find out that he's in the barn doing something else. What is that? He's playing with his horse. I need to find my other pen. All right, so now, if you would, let's look at the character chart that I gave you, because we did find some things out about some of the different characters here. All right, so what do we find out about Darrell? Just from this chapter. He likes water. How do you spell gourd? I misspelled it. Anyway, he is able to tell us what's going on with Jewel without being there.
Could that mean that him and Jewel are close?
It could, yeah. It could tell us other things about him as well. Okay, so Jewel, he has a horse. And he's trying to train it or tame it. All right, and we find out also that Anne's has feet that are bad feet, from working in wet ground with bad shoes on. All right. So our next chapter is a Jewel chapter, and it's not that long. All right, we do see more bad language from Jewel. You will definitely see Jewel characterized with bad language much more than any other character, okay? It's because he stays out there right under the window hammering and sawing on that box. Who's he talking about? Cash. Where she's got to see him. Okay, so Addie can see him working on this box, which is her what? Coffin. Where every breath she draws is full of his knocking and sawing, where she can see him saying, see what a good one I'm making for you? I told him to go somewhere else. I said, good God, do you want to see her in it? It's like when he was a little boy, and she says if she had some fertilizer, she would try to raise some flowers, and he'd taken the bread pan and brought it back from the barn full of dung. Okay, so what is Cash trying to get from his mother? Approval. All right, so Cash seeks approval from her. And now, them others sitting there like buzzards. Okay, this is very important. Why would he say that they're sitting there like buzzards?
Because aren't like buzzards like it's around by like this?
Yeah, buzzards, they feed on the dead. So what's going on here? Yeah, they're waiting for her to die. So who are the buzzards?
The others.
Yeah, the other members of the family. Okay? Waiting, fanning themselves. Because I said, if you wouldn't keep on sawing and nailing at it until a man can't sleep, even, and her hands lying on the quilt like two of them rotes dug up and tried to wash and you couldn't get them clean. I can see the fan in Dewey Dale's arm. I said, if you just let her alone, sawing and knocking and keeping the air always moving so fast on her face, and when you're tired, you can't breathe it, and that ad's going. One lick less, one lick less, one lick less, until everybody that passes in the road will have to stop and see it and say what a fine carpenter he is. Okay, so one lick less, one lick less, one lick less. Remember when we were looking at it earlier and Darrell was talking about the chuck, chuck, chuck of the ads? Do y'all remember that? All right, now Jewel, he's saying one lick less. Again, so we kind of have that beat because of the way that the words are arranged describing it. So it's almost as if we have a beat that's speeding up. And so Cash is like, Jewel says that he feels like what Cash is doing, he's doing it in order to have people that pass on the road stop and brag on his carpentry skills. All right? If it had, and this is really curious right here, okay? This section right here is really curious. If it had just been me when Cash fell off that church, and if it had just been me when Pa laid sick with that load of wood fell on him, it would not be happening with every in the county coming to stare at her. Because if there is a God, what the heck is he for? It would just be me and her on a high hill, and me rolling the rocks down the hill at their faces, picking them up and throwing them down the hill faces, and teeth and all, by God, until she was quiet, and not that ad's going, one lick less, and we could be quiet. All right, we need to mark teeth here too. We're going to find out why that's important later. What is he saying?
It would have been him, now he was with half.
Okay. I kind of look at this in two ways because we don't know the definite answer, all right? So I look at it like maybe if it had been me when Cash fell off of the church, if I had been the one that had fallen off the church, maybe, I might not have recovered and I could be laying here and going with her. Or if the wood had fallen on me instead of Pa, maybe I could be the one dying with her. I look at it that way, but I also look at it as if I was the only one there with Cash, I would have let him die. And if I was the only one there with Pa, I would have let him die, and then it would just be me and her. So whatever is happening, he definitely wants to distance the others from his mother and have her to himself. Okay? So, whichever one he has here, or however he's rationalizing this, because this is happening in his brain, before he even has the wherewithal to speak the words. So these are very deep emotions. What we can gather from this is that Jewel wants Addie to himself. So Jewel wants Addie to himself. All right, so looking at our questions, why is Jewel angry at Cash?
Because he feels like the only reason he's making that casket is so he can get everybody's approval that has to look at him.
Yeah, exactly. The approval. And he's building the coffin where Addie can see it. He's like, what's up with this? That is very gothic. Who does that? And how does Jewel feel about the other people in his family? He doesn't like them. He doesn't want them there. Okay, so on our character sheet about Jewel, we can write down, that Jewel's language is bad, profane. and he does not like the other members of his family. All right, Darrell. Our next chapter is Darrell. We watch him come around the corner and mount the steps. He does not look at us. You ready? He says. If you're hitched up, I say. I say, wait. He stops, looking at Pa. Vernon spits without moving. He spits with decorous and deliberate precision into the pocked dust below the porch. Pa rubs his hands slowly on his knees. He is gazing out beyond the crest of the bluff, out across the land. Jewel watches him a moment, and he then goes to the pail and drinks again. I mislike undecision as much as e'er a man, Pa says. It means $3, I say. The shirt across Pa's hump is faded lighter than the rest of it. There is no sweat stain on his shirt. I have never seen a sweat stain on his shirt. He was sick once from working in the sun when he was 22 years old, and he tells people that if he ever sweats, he will die. I suppose he believes it. So what do we find out here about Ann's? This is Paul. Ann's is Paul. Huh?
He's scared to sweat.
Why? Okay. What might that be an excuse for? Not doing any work. He's lazy. But if she don't last until you get back, he says, she will be disappointed. What do you mean if she don't last? Addie, if she dies before they get back. Vernon spits into the dust, but it will rain before morning. She's counted on it, Pa says. She'll want to start right away. I know her. I promised her I'd keep the team here and ready, and she's counting on it. We need that $3 then, sure, I say. He gazes out over the land, rubbing his hands on his knees. Since he lost his teeth, his mouth collapses in slow repetition when he dips. The stubble gives his lower face that appearance that old dogs have. You better make up your mind soon so we can get there and get a load on before dark, I say. Ma ain't that sick, Jewel says. Shut up, Darrell. All right, so what description here do we learn? What else do we learn about Ann's?
He dips.
And?
He doesn't have any teeth.
He has no teeth. No teeth. All right, so Jewel is kind of in denial about how sick Addie is. That's right, Vernon says. She seemed more like herself today than she has in a week. Time you and Jewel get back, she'll be setting up. You ought to know, Jewel says. You've been here often enough looking at her. You or your folks. Vernon looks at him. Jewel's eyes look like pale wood in his high-blooded face. He is a head taller than any of the rest of us. Always was. So again, pointing out this difference. All right? And so Jewel is basically saying, I don't like the fact, Mr. Toll, that you and your family are here looking at her. It's just like you're here observing her, watching her die. I told him that's why Ma always whipped him and petted him more. All right, so we find out that Jewel got a little bit more attention because he was always peekling around the house more. That's why she named him Jewel. I told them. Okay, so what are the connotations of the name Jewel? Yeah, so Darrell believes, how did Addie feel about him? Yeah, he was her favorite. She valued him the most. Shut up, Jewel, Pa says, but as though he is not listening much. He gazes out across the land, rubbing his knees. You could borrow the loan of Vernon's team, and we could catch up with you, I say, if she didn't wait for us. I'll shut your mouth, Jewel says. She'll want to go an hour, Pa says. He rubs his knees. Don't err a man mislike it more. It's laying there, watching Cash whittle on that, Jewel says. He says it harshly, savagely, but he does not say the word. like a little boy in the dark to flail his courage, and suddenly aghast into silence by his own noise. All right, so whittle, he's kind of like demeaning Cash's work, because whittling is like where you just kind of cut down wood to pass the time. All right. She wanted that like she wants to go in her own wagon, Pa says. She'll rest easier for knowing it's a good one and private. She was ever a private woman. You know it well. Then let it be private, Jewel says. But how the heck can you expect it to be? He looks at the back of Pa's head, his eyes like pale wooden eyes. Sho, Vernon says. She'll hold on till it's finished. She'll hold on till everything's ready, till her own good time. And with the roads like they are now, it won't take you no time to get her to town. It's fixin' to rain, Pa says. I'm a luckless man. I have ever been. He rubs his hands on his knees. It's that derned doctor, liable to come at any time. I couldn't get word to him till so late. If he was to come tomorrow and tell her the time was nigh, she wouldn't wait. I know her. Wagon or no wagon, she wouldn't wait. Then she'd be upset, and I wouldn't upset her for the living world. With that family burying ground in Jefferson, and them of her blood waiting for her there, she'll be impatient. I promised my word me and the boys would get her there quick as mules could walk it, so she could rest quiet. He rubs his hands on his knees. No man ever misliked it more. So what are they talking about doing? Yeah, they're talking about where Addie wants to be buried, and she wants to be buried where?
With her family.
With her family in Jefferson. And how does Ann's feel about it?
Does he want to like honor that and like take her there? Or does he...
Yes, he wants to honor it and take her there, even though he doesn't like the idea. If everybody wasn't burning heck to get her there, Jewel says with a harsh, savage voice. So Jewel feels like everybody's just trying to get her to die really fast, okay? With Cash all day long right under the window, hammering and sawing at that. It was her wish, Pa says. You got no affection nor gentleness for her. You never had. We would be beholden to no man, he says, me and her. We have never yet been, and she will rest quieter for knowing it, and that it was her own blood sawed out of the board and drove the nails. She was ever one to clean up after herself. It means $3, I say. Do you want us to go or not? Pa rubs his knees. We'll be back by tomorrow, sundown. Well, Pa says. He looks out over the land, awry-haired, mouthing the snuff slowly against his gums. Come on, Jewel says. He goes down the steps. Vernon spits neatly into the dust. By sundown now, Pa says. I would not keep her waiting. Jewel glances back, and then he goes on around the house. I enter the hall, hearing the voices before I reach the door. Tilting a little down the hall, as our house does, a breeze draws through the hall all the time, up slanting. A feather dropped near the front door will rise and brush along the ceiling, slanting backward until it reaches the down-turning current at the back door. So with voices. As you enter the hall, they sound as though they were speaking out of the air about your head. Okay, so we have another mention of like a feather, which is related to what? What has feathers?
Birds.
Birds. Okay. So what job is being discussed in this section? Taking a load of wood for delivery. And what is the reason to do it? What is the reason that they are kind of pushing to take this load of wood? For $3. And what is the reason to not do it?
They want to be there just in case Addie.
Yeah, Addie might pass while they're gone. And what decision is reached? They're going. All right, and so we learned a little bit more. Jewel, he doesn't like the members of his family. He doesn't like anybody kind of like sitting around. We find out that Ann's is lazy. We find out that Addie wants to be buried with her people in Jefferson. All right, we find out that Darrell thinks that Jewel was Addie's favorite. All right. Okay, so our next chapter is Cora Tull, and Cora's kind of long-winded. And then we have a Dewey Dale chapter, and the Dewey Dale chapter is really important. So I'm going to kind of quickly read the Cora Tull chapter with you. It was the sweetest thing I ever saw. It was like he knew he would never see her again. That Ann's Bundren was driving him from his mother's deathbed, never to see her in this world again. I always said Darrell was different from those others. I always said he was the only one of them that had his mother's nature, any natural affection. Not that Jewel, the one she labored so to bear and coddled and petted so, and him flinging into tantrums or sulking spells, inventing devilment to devil her until I would have frailed him time and time. Not him to come and tell her goodbye. Not him to miss a chance to make that extra $3 at the price of his mother's goodbye kiss. A Bundren through and through, loving nobody, caring for nothing except how to get something with the least amount of work. Mr. Tull says Darrell asked them to wait. He said Darrell almost begged them on his knees not to force him to leave her in her condition. But nothing would do but Ann's and Jewel must make that $3. Nobody that knows Ann's could have expected different, but to think of that boy, that Jewel, selling all those years of self-denial and downright partiality, they couldn't fool me. Mr. Tull says Mrs. Bundren liked Jewel the least of all, but I knew better. I knew she was partial to him, to the same quality in him that let her put up with Ann's Bundren when Mr. Tull said she ought to poison him for $3, denying his mother the goodbye kiss. Why, for the last 3 weeks I've been coming over every time I could, coming sometimes when I shouldn't have, neglecting my own family and duties so that somebody would be with her in her last moments and she would not have to face the great unknown without one familiar face to give her courage. Not that I deserve credit for it. I will expect the same for myself. But thank God it will be the faces of my loved kin, my blood and flesh, for in my husband and children I have been more blessed than most, trials though they have been at times. She lived a lonely woman, lonely with her pride, trying to make folks believe different, hiding the fact that they just suffered her, because she was not cold in the coffin before they were carting her 40 miles away to bury her, flouting the will of God to do it, refusing to let her lie in the same earth with those Bundrens. If she wanted to go, Mr. Tull said, it was her own wish to lie among her own people. Then why didn't she go alive, I said. Not one of them would have stopped her, even with that little one almost old enough now to be selfish and stone-hearted like the rest of them. It was her own wish, Mr. Tull said. I heard Ann's say it was. And you would believe Ann's, of course, I said. A man like you would. Don't tell me. I believe him about something he couldn't expect to make anything off of me by not telling, Mr. Tull said. Don't tell me, I said. A woman's place is with her husband and children, alive or dead. Would you expect me to want to go back to Alabama and leave you and the girls when my time comes, that I left of my own will, to cast my lot with yours for better and worse, until death and after? Well, folks are different, he said. I should hope so. I have tried to live right in the sight of God and man, for the honor and comfort of my Christian husband.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? At this time, we are going to make our announcement of valedictorian, salutatorian, for the class of 2019. This is obviously a very special moment for many students that are in this group, and we just want to commend them on their hard work and on this amazing accomplishment.